The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon when Lieutenant Jessica walked through the gates of Fort Harrison for the first time. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from years of proving yourself in places where nobody expects you to succeed. At 28 years old, she was about to make history as the youngest woman ever put in charge of Alpha Company's Special Reconnaissance Unit. Her boots clicked against the concrete as she made her way to the main building. Other soldiers stopped their conversations to watch her pass. Some nodded respectfully, recognizing the silver bars on her uniform. Others just stared, their faces showing exactly what they were thinking. She had seen those looks before at every base, every assignment, every promotion ceremony where she was the only woman in the room. The building smelled like coffee, cleaning supplies, and that particular mix of leather and metal that every military facility seemed to have. Jessica found her way to the briefing room where her new unit was waiting. She paused outside the door for just a moment, taking a deep breath. Everything she had worked for over the past 10 years had led to this moment. When she walked into the room, 24 pairs of eyes turned toward her. 24 men who had been working together as a tight-knit team for the past 3 years. They had expected their new commanding officer to be someone like them, someone who understood their inside jokes, their traditions, their way of doing things. Instead, they got her. Sergeant Thompson stood at attention near the front of the room. He was 35, with the kind of weathered face that comes from spending half your life outdoors in difficult conditions. His service record was impressive. 12 years in the military, 2 tours overseas, commendations for bravery, and the respect of every man in the unit. He had been hoping for a promotion to lieutenant himself, but instead found himself serving under someone 10 years younger, who had never served with their particular group. Jessica surveyed the room slowly, making eye contact with each soldier. She could read their thoughts as clearly as if they had spoken them out loud. Some were curious, willing to give her a chance. Others were skeptical, waiting to see if she could handle the pressure. A few were openly hostile, their arms crossed and jaws set in defiance. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I know this is not what you expected, and I know some of you have questions about my qualifications. That's fair. I would have questions too." She moved to the front of the room, her hands clasped behind her back in a classic military stance. "I want you to know that I requested this assignment specifically. I asked to be placed with this unit because of your reputation. You have the highest success rate in the division, the lowest casualty numbers, and the kind of teamwork that other units spend years trying to develop." Thompson shifted slightly, his expression softening just a fraction. He had not expected her to acknowledge their achievements so directly. "I also want you to know that I am not here to change everything overnight," Jessica continued. "I am here to learn from you, just as much as I am here to lead you. Each of you has skills and experience that I respect, but I also bring my own knowledge and perspective to this unit." She walked over to a map on the wall showing their area of operations. "Our mission remains the same. We gather intelligence. We support other units when needed, and we bring everyone home safely. The only thing that has changed is that now I am responsible for making sure we accomplish those goals." Private Collins, barely 19 and still new enough to the unit that he sometimes forgot protocol, raised his hand tentatively. "Mum, can I ask where you served before this?" Jessica smiled slightly. It was exactly the kind of question she had been expecting. "I spent 2 years in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, then 18 months in Iraq with a joint intelligence unit. After that, I was stationed at Fort Bragg working on tactical planning and coordination between different military branches." The room was quiet as the soldiers processed this information. Her resume was solid, but it was still different from theirs. They had all come up through the same system, trained together, fought together. She was an outsider, regardless of her qualifications. Sergeant Thompson finally spoke up. "Ma'am, with respect, this unit has its own way of doing things. We have procedures that have kept us all alive and successful for 3 years. I hope you will take that into consideration before making any major changes." Jessica nodded slowly. She understood what he was really saying. He was drawing a line in the sand, establishing his position as the voice of the unit's traditions and methods. It was not quite insubordination, but it was close. It was a test, and everyone in the room knew it. "Sergeant Thompson, I appreciate your concern for the unit's welfare," she replied evenly. "And you are absolutely right that this unit has an excellent track record. I have no intention of disrupting successful operations without good reason. However, I also expect that when I do give orders, they will be followed completely and immediately. Is that understood?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thompson held her gaze for a long moment before responding. "Yes, ma'am, understood." But Jessica could see in his eyes that nothing was really understood yet. The real test was still coming. These men needed to see more than her rank and her credentials. They needed to see what she was made of when things got difficult. They needed to know that she could handle the pressure, make the tough decisions, and earn her place among them through action rather than authority. As she dismissed the unit for their regular training schedule, Jessica knew that the next few weeks would determine everything. She had dealt with skeptical soldiers before, but never as their commanding officer. Never with this much responsibility resting on her shoulders. The weight of proving herself, not just to these men but to everyone watching this experiment in military leadership, was enormous. Walking back to her office, Jessica reflected on the challenge ahead. She had spent years preparing for this moment, studying leadership techniques, honing her skills, and building the kind of resume that would open doors. But all of that preparation meant nothing if she could not earn the respect of the men she was supposed to lead. The afternoon sun streamed through her office window as she reviewed personnel files and mission reports. Each document told her more about the unit's history, their successes, and their methods. She was looking for opportunities to prove herself, ways to demonstrate her value without undermining their confidence in their existing approaches. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to show these soldiers that she belonged here. Jessica was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since Lieutenant Jessica took command of Alpha Company, and the honeymoon period was definitely over. The initial politeness from her soldiers had gradually given way to something more honest but far more challenging. They were testing her, pushing boundaries, waiting to see how she would react when things got difficult. The morning started like any other, with the unit gathering for their weekly tactical training exercise. Jessica had planned a complex scenario that would test their coordination and decision-making skills. The exercise involved infiltrating a mock enemy compound, gathering intelligence, and extracting safely without being detected. It was the kind of operation they might face in real combat, and she wanted to see how well they worked together under pressure. The training ground was set up with obstacles, hiding spots, and designated enemy positions. Jessica stood at the command post with her clipboard, watching as her soldiers prepared their equipment and reviewed the mission parameters. Everything seemed normal until Sergeant Thompson approached her with a concerned expression. "Ma'am, I need to discuss the approach route you have selected," he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to catch the attention of nearby soldiers. "The path you have marked takes us directly through the most exposed area of the compound. We have been running exercises on this course for 2 years, and we have never used that route because it puts the team at unnecessary risk." Jessica looked at the map spread out on the table between them. She had studied the terrain carefully and chosen what she believed was the most effective approach. It was more direct than the route they usually took, which meant less time in enemy territory, but it also required better coordination and timing. "Sergeant, I understand your concern," she replied calmly, "but this route offers several advantages. It cuts our exposure time in half, and it approaches from the direction they will least expect. Yes, it requires more precision, but this unit has the skills to execute it successfully." Thompson shook his head, his frustration becoming more visible. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that is not how we do things here. The route we normally use has worked perfectly for every exercise and every real mission we have run. Why change something that is not broken?" The other soldiers had stopped their preparations and were watching the exchange with keen interest. Jessica could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would handle this direct challenge to her authority. This was the moment she had known would come eventually. Thompson was not just questioning her tactical decision. He was questioning her right to make decisions for the unit at all. Because, "Sergeant," Jessica said, her voice remaining steady, but gaining a slight edge, "the enemy adapts, and so must we. If we always use the same approach, we become predictable. Predictable soldiers are dead soldiers." Thompson crossed his arms, a gesture that in military settings is usually considered borderline insubordinate. "Ma'am, maybe that is how things work back at headquarters, but this is the real world. These men trust the methods that have kept them alive and successful. They do not need experimental tactics that put them at risk just to prove a point." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew that every soldier watching this exchange would remember how she handled it. If she backed down now, she would never recover her authority. If she came down to hard, she would be seen as a tyrant who could not handle criticism. "I see," she said quietly. "And you speak for all the men in this unit?" "I speak for their safety and their success," Thompson replied. "That is my job as their sergeant." Jessica nodded slowly, then looked around at the gathered soldiers. "I want everyone to gather around for a moment," she called out. The unit formed a loose circle around the command post, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and tension. "Sergeant Thompson has raised an important point about our approach route," Jessica began. "He believes we should stick with the proven method that has worked well in the past. I believe we should try a new approach that offers different advantages. This is exactly the kind of disagreement that makes units stronger when it is handled properly." She paused, making eye contact with several of the soldiers. "Here's what we are going to do. We will run the exercise twice. First, we will use Sergeant Thompson's preferred route. Then we will run it again using my suggested approach. After both runs, we will compare the results and see which method works better for this particular scenario." Thompson looked surprised. He had expected either immediate compliance or a direct order to follow her plan. Instead, she had turned the disagreement into a learning opportunity for the entire unit. However, Jessica continued, her tone becoming more serious. "I want to be absolutely clear about something. During actual operations, there will not be time for debates or committee decisions. When I give an order in the field, it will be followed immediately and without question. Today we have the luxury of testing different approaches. In combat, hesitation kills." The first run went exactly as Thompson had predicted. His route was longer but safer, and the unit executed it flawlessly. They had run this approach so many times that every movement was automatic. They completed the objective without any simulated casualties and extracted cleanly. During the break between exercises, Jessica noticed several soldiers talking quietly with Thompson. She could not hear what they were saying, but their body language suggested they were congratulating him on being right about the route. The second run was more challenging. Jessica's approach required split-second timing and perfect coordination. For the first few minutes, it looked like it might be a disaster. Two soldiers nearly collided while moving through a narrow passage, and the team had to adjust their formation twice to avoid simulated enemy detection. But then something interesting happened. The unit adapted. They began moving with the kind of precision that only comes from being truly challenged. Private Collins, who usually stayed in the middle of the formation, stepped up to take point when the situation required it. Corporal Hayes, normally quiet and reserved, began calling out tactical observations that helped the entire team. When they reached the objective, they had completed the mission in nearly half the time of the first run, with no simulated casualties, and complete surprise achieved. As the unit gathered for the after-action review, Jessica could see that something had changed. The soldiers were talking excitedly about the second approach, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved. They had been pushed out of their comfort zone and had risen to meet the challenge. Thompson stood quietly at the edge of the group, his expression thoughtful. Jessica approached him as the other soldiers were cleaning up their equipment. "Sergeant, I want to thank you for pushing back on my plan, she said. Having to defend my reasoning made me think more carefully about the risks and benefits. That made the exercise better for everyone. Thompson looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Ma'am, I have to admit, your approach worked better than I expected. Maybe we have been playing it too safe. Maybe. Jessica agreed. But safety and innovation do not have to be opposites. The key is knowing when to take calculated risks and when to stick with proven methods. As she walked back to her office that evening, Jessica knew that she had won an important battle. Not against Thompson or her soldiers, but against their assumption that she was not capable of making good decisions under pressure. She had proven that she could handle criticism, adapt her plans, and still maintain her authority. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. Earning respect in the military is not a one-time event. It is something that has to be proven, again and again, in small moments and big decisions, until it becomes unshakable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would be ready for them. The tension between Lieutenant Jessica and Sergeant Thompson had been building for weeks, like pressure in a steam pipe that was ready to burst. After their public disagreement during the training exercise, things had gotten more complicated. Rather than better, Thompson had gained confidence from proving his point about the route, and some of the other soldiers were starting to question Jessica's decisions more openly. It all came to a head on a rainy Thursday morning during what should have been a routine equipment inspection. Jessica was reviewing the unit's gear when she noticed that several items were not up to standard. Some of the radio equipment had not been properly maintained, and two of the vehicles needed repairs that should have been completed weeks ago. Sergeant Thompson, she called out across the motor pool, I need to speak with you about the maintenance. Reports, Thompson walked over with that casual stride that somehow managed to show respect for her rank while also making it clear he thought she was wasting his time. Several other soldiers stopped what they were doing to watch, sensing that something important was about to happen. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? Thompson asked, his voice perfectly polite, but with an undertone that suggested he already knew where this conversation was heading. Jessica held up a clipboard with the maintenance records. According to these reports, all equipment was inspected and approved last week. But I'm looking at radio batteries that are completely dead, a vehicle with a cracked windshield, and communication gear that has not been cleaned properly. Either these reports are wrong, or the inspections were not done correctly. Thompson glanced at the equipment she was pointing to, then back at her face. Ma'am, that gear is functional. It might not look perfect, but it works. We have been using this equipment successfully for months without any problems. That is not the point, Sergeant, Jessica replied, her voice staying calm but becoming more firm. Military equipment must be maintained to regulation standards, not just to the point where it barely works. When we are deployed in real situations, there is no room for equipment failure because someone decided that good enough was actually good enough. The other soldiers were definitely listening now. This was not just about maintenance schedules or equipment standards. This was about who really set the rules for how this unit operated. Thompson crossed his arms again, that gesture that had become his signature move whenever he disagreed with something. Ma'am, with respect. This unit has completed every mission successfully for 3 years. Our equipment has never failed us when it mattered. Maybe the problem is not with our standards, but with expectations that do not match real-world conditions. There it was, the direct challenge that Jessica had been expecting ever since she took command. Thompson was not just questioning her judgment about equipment maintenance. He was questioning her understanding of how military units actually function versus how they look on paper. Jessica felt something shift inside her, like a door closing on her patience and opening on her determination. She had spent 3 weeks trying to earn respect through careful diplomacy and gradual changes. But sometimes, respect could only be earned through direct confrontation. I see, she said quietly. So you think my expectations are unrealistic? I think, Thompson said, his voice getting slightly louder, that this unit knows how to take care of itself. We have been doing things our way for a long time, and it has worked. Maybe instead of trying to fix things that are not broken, You should try to understand why we do things the way we do. The motor pool had gone completely silent. Even the mechanics working on the other side of the building had stopped what they were doing. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for months. Jessica nodded slowly, then walked over to a table where she set down her clipboard. Sergeant Thompson, I want you to meet me in the training facility tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Just you and me. No witnesses, no regulations, no rank insignia. Just two soldiers working out a disagreement. Thompson looked surprised. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you mean. Jessica said, turning to face him directly, that you think I do not understand. Real-world conditions. You think I am all theory and no practice. Tomorrow morning, we are going to settle that question once and for all. The challenge hung in the air between them. Jessica was proposing something that was technically against regulations, but that every soldier understood. She was calling Thompson out for a one-on-one test of skills, strength, and determination. Thompson studied her face for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if she was serious or if this was some kind of trap. Finally, he nodded. Yes, ma'am, I will be there. That evening, Jessica sat in her quarters thinking about what she had just committed herself to. Thompson was bigger than her, stronger than her, and had years more experience in combat situations. But she also knew things about herself that he did not know, things that were not in her official military record. Before joining the Army, Jessica had spent 4 years studying martial arts. Not the basic self-defense that all soldiers learn, but serious, competition-level training. She had also grown up with 3 older brothers who had never gone easy on her just because she was smaller. She had learned early in life that being underestimated could be an advantage, if you knew how to use it properly. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the training facility 5 minutes early. The building was empty and quiet, with only the emergency lighting casting shadows across the exercise mats. She had changed into standard physical training gear, and she spent a few minutes stretching and preparing herself mentally for what was about to happen. Thompson arrived exactly on time, also dressed for physical exercise. He looked around the empty facility and shook his head slightly, as if he still could not believe they were actually doing this. Ma'am, I want you to know that I do not take any pleasure in this, he said. But if this is what it takes to settle things between us, then let us get it over with. Jessica nodded. Before we start, I want to make something clear. This is not about proving who is stronger or tougher. This is about proving that respect has to be earned through actions, not assumed through rank or tradition. They moved to the center of the mat, facing each other in a classic confrontation setup. Thompson had at least 40 pounds and 6 inches of height advantage, plus years of experience in actual combat situations. But Jessica had speed, training, and the kind of focused determination that comes from a lifetime of proving that size is not everything. The match lasted exactly 12 minutes. For the first few minutes, Thompson dominated through pure strength and aggression. He was used to overwhelming opponents through force, and he assumed the same approach would work here. But Jessica absorbed his attacks, redirected his energy, and waited for him to tire himself out. When the moment came, she used a combination move that her martial arts instructor had drilled into her thousands of times. She caught Thompson off balance, used his own momentum against him, and took him down to the mat with a technique that left him flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling, with her knee pressed firmly against his chest. Now, Jessica said, breathing hard but keeping her voice steady, I want you to understand something about leadership and respect. She reached down and pulled up the edge of her training shirt, revealing a long scar that ran along her ribs. It was the kind of mark that could only come from serious injury in a combat situation. This is from an explosive device in Afghanistan, she said quietly. 2 of my soldiers died that day. I spent 6 weeks in a military hospital and another 3 months in physical therapy learning to walk properly again. Every decision I make, every regulation I enforce, every standard I maintain is because I know what happens when things go wrong. Thompson stared up at her, his expression changing as he processed what she was telling him. So when I ask you to maintain equipment to regulation standards, it is not because I like paperwork or because I want to make your life difficult. It is because I have seen what happens when soldiers die. Because someone decided that good enough was actually good enough. She stepped back and extended her hand to help him up. I am not asking you to respect my rank, Sergeant. I am asking you to respect the responsibility that comes with keeping these soldiers alive and ready for whatever they might face. Thompson took her hand and pulled himself to his feet. For a moment, they stood there looking at each other, both breathing hard from the physical exertion and the emotional intensity of the confrontation. Finally, Thompson came to attention and gave her a perfect military salute, not the casual acknowledgement that soldiers give to officers they have to obey, but the kind of salute that is reserved for leaders they choose to follow. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply. "I understand." As they walked out of the training facility together, Jessica knew that everything had changed between them, not just their professional relationship, but their understanding of what it meant to be soldiers serving together. The real battle had never been about who was stronger or who was right about equipment maintenance. It had been about whether she could prove that she belonged there, not just as an officer, but as someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with military leadership. The change in Sergeant Thompson was immediate and impossible to ignore. The morning after his confrontation with Lieutenant Jessica, he walked into the briefing room with a completely different energy, where before he had carried himself with the subtle resistance of someone who was following orders because he had to. Now he moved with the confidence of someone who was part of a team working toward the same goals. Private Collins was the first to notice something had shifted. "Sarge seems different today," he whispered to Corporal Hayes during their morning equipment check. "Did you see how he backed up the lieutenant's new training schedule without even hesitating?" Hayes nodded, equally puzzled. Yesterday he was complaining about her changes to the patrol formations. Today he is explaining to everyone why those changes make tactical sense. Something definitely happened between them. But Thompson was not talking about what had occurred in the training facility, and neither was Jessica. The details of their confrontation remained private, creating an air of mystery that actually helped rather than hurt Jessica's authority. The soldiers could see that their sergeant now respected their commanding officer completely, and that was enough for most of them to start adjusting their own attitudes. The real test of this new dynamic came 2 weeks later when Private Williams started showing signs of serious stress. Williams was 22 years old and had joined the unit 6 months earlier, fresh from basic training and eager to prove himself. But lately, he had been making small mistakes during exercises, losing focus during briefings, and isolating himself from the other soldiers during downtime. Jessica noticed the changes before anyone else did. She had made it a point to study each soldier's normal behavior patterns, and Williams was definitely not acting like himself. During a routine training exercise, she watched him freeze up completely when they encountered a simulated ambush scenario. Instead of following his training, he just stood in the middle of the exercise area, staring at nothing while the simulation continued around him. After the exercise, Jessica called Williams into her office for a private conversation. The young soldier sat across from her desk, his hands fidgeting nervously as he waited for her to speak. "Williams, I have noticed some changes in your performance lately," Jessica began, keeping her voice gentle but direct. "I want you to know that this conversation is completely confidential. Nothing you tell me will go in your official record unless it involves something that could put you or other soldiers in danger." Williams looked up at her with obvious relief. "Ma'am, I have been having some trouble sleeping. Sometimes during exercises, especially when there are loud noises or smoke, I start thinking about things that happened before I joined the Army. Things from when I was growing up." Jessica leaned forward slightly, recognizing the signs of someone dealing with traumatic stress. "Williams, have you ever talked to anyone about these experiences? A counselor, a chaplain, anyone trained to help with these kinds of issues?" The young soldier shook his head. "No, ma'am. I was afraid that if I talked to someone officially, it might affect my career. I thought I could handle it on my own." "I understand that concern," Jessica replied. But trying to handle serious stress alone is like trying to perform surgery on yourself. It is possible in theory, but it is much more likely to make things worse than better. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a business card. This is Dr. Martinez at the Base Mental Health Clinic. She specializes in helping soldiers deal with stress and trauma. I want you to make an appointment with her this week. Williams took the card but still looked uncertain. Ma'am, what if this affects my security clearance or my assignments? Jessica smiled reassuringly. Williams, getting help for stress or trauma is not a sign of weakness, and it will not hurt your career. In fact, soldiers who get proper support tend to perform better and advance faster than those who try to tough it out alone. I will personally make sure that seeking help is seen as a positive step, not a problem. The conversation with Williams was just the beginning of a series of changes that Jessica implemented over the following months. She started holding informal one-on-one meetings with each soldier, not to check up on them or evaluate their performance, but to understand their individual goals, concerns, and challenges. When Corporal Hayes mentioned that his wife was struggling with the stress of military life and frequent deployments, Jessica connected them with family support services that provided counseling and practical assistance. When Private Rodriguez expressed interest in advancing to sergeant rank, she created a mentorship program that paired him with Thompson for leadership training. The most significant change came when Jessica discovered that several soldiers were having financial difficulties due to low pay and lack of financial education. Instead of treating this as a personal problem that soldiers should solve on their own, she brought in a financial counselor from the base services office to teach a series of workshops on budgeting, saving, and managing money on military pay. Thompson initially questioned whether these programs were really part of their mission as a combat unit. Ma'am, I support taking care of our people, but is it really our job to solve everyone's personal problems? He asked during one of their weekly planning meetings. Thompson, think about it this way. Jessica replied, a soldier who is worried about his family's financial security is not going to be focused during a mission. A soldier who is dealing with unresolved trauma is going to make mistakes under pressure. A soldier who feels like the Army does not care about him as a person is not going to give his best effort when it really matters. She pulled out a chart showing the unit's performance metrics over the past few months. Look at these numbers. Since we started implementing these support programs, our training scores have improved by 15%. Equipment maintenance issues have dropped to almost zero, and we have had zero disciplinary problems or requests for transfer. Thompson studied the chart, nodding slowly as he saw the clear connection between supporting soldiers as whole people and improving their performance as military professionals. The transformation became even more obvious during their quarterly evaluation exercise, a complex multi-day scenario that tested everything from individual skills to unit coordination. Previous evaluations had always gone well, but this time was different. The soldiers worked together with a level of trust and communication that impressed even the outside evaluators. Your unit has exceptional cohesion, Colonel Martinez told Jessica after reviewing the evaluation results. The soldiers clearly trust each other and their leadership completely. How did you achieve this level of teamwork so quickly? Jessica thought about the question for a moment before answering. I think it came from recognizing that soldiers are not just weapons or tools to be maintained. They are people with complex lives, personal challenges, and individual goals. When you treat them like complete human beings instead of just military assets, they respond by giving you their absolute best effort. The colonel raised an eyebrow. That is an interesting leadership philosophy. Not everyone in the military shares that perspective. Maybe not, Jessica agreed. But the results speak for themselves. This unit is not just following orders anymore. They are committed to the mission and to each other in a way that goes beyond duty or discipline. As winter turned to spring, the changes in Alpha Company became the subject of discussion throughout the base. Other unit commanders started asking Jessica about her methods, and several requested permission to observe her training sessions and leadership meetings. Thompson, who had once been her biggest skeptic, became her strongest advocate. During a conversation with other sergeants at the base mess hall, he was overheard saying, "Lieutenant Jessica does not just command respect, she earns it every single day. She has turned our unit into something special, and every soldier in Alpha Company would follow her anywhere." The transformation was complete. But Jessica knew it was also ongoing. Building trust and maintaining unit cohesion was not a one-time achievement, but a daily commitment. Every decision she made, every interaction with her soldiers, every response to new challenges would either strengthen or weaken the foundation they had built together. Looking back on those early weeks when Thompson had questioned her every decision, Jessica realized that his resistance had actually made her a better leader. By forcing her to prove herself and defend her methods, he had pushed her to develop a leadership style that was both strong and compassionate, both demanding and supportive. The unit that had once been a collection of individual soldiers following orders had become a true team, united by shared values and mutual respect. And at the center of that transformation was the understanding that real leadership is not about controlling people, but about creating conditions where people can become the best versions of themselves. 2 years had passed since Lieutenant Jessica first walked through the gates of Fort Harrison, and the transformation of Alpha Company had become legendary throughout the entire military base. What had started as a skeptical group of soldiers, reluctantly accepting a female commanding officer, had evolved into one of the most respected and effective units in the division. The morning Jessica received her promotion orders to the Pentagon was both exciting and bittersweet. She had always known this assignment was temporary, a stepping stone in her military career. But saying goodbye to the unit she had helped shape was going to be more difficult than she had expected. She decided to tell Thompson first, before making the announcement to the entire unit. He was in the motor pool, as usual, checking over equipment with the same attention to detail that had become standard practice. Under Jessica's leadership, when she approached him with the official letter in her hand, he immediately recognized the serious expression on her face. "Sergeant Thompson, I need to speak with you privately," she said, gesturing toward her office. They walked across the base in comfortable silence, something that would have been impossible during those first few weeks when every conversation between them had been filled with tension and unspoken challenges. Now they worked together like partners who understood each other completely. Once they were seated in her office, Jessica handed him the letter. "I received my new assignment yesterday. I will be leaving for Washington in 6 weeks, Thompson." Read the orders carefully, his expression showing a mixture of pride and disappointment. "Congratulations, Mom. The Pentagon is a big step up. You have definitely earned it. Thank you." Jessica replied, "But I have to admit, leaving this unit is going to be harder than I thought it would be. We have built something special here, and I'm going to miss being part of it." Thompson set the letter down on her desk and looked at her directly. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" Jessica nodded. "When you first arrived here, did you know how much resistance you were going to face? Did you have a plan for dealing with soldiers like me who were not exactly welcoming?" Jessica smiled at the memory. "To be honest, Thompson, I expected resistance. I had faced it at every assignment throughout my career, but I did not have a detailed plan for winning people over. I just knew that I had to prove myself through actions rather than words." And the confrontation we had in the training facility, Thompson continued, "Did you plan that, or was it just something that happened in the moment?" "That was completely spontaneous," Jessica admitted. "I knew that we needed to settle things between us somehow, but I did not know how until that moment. Looking back, it was probably risky. It could have backfired completely." Thompson shook his head. "No, ma'am, it was exactly what needed to happen. I had to see that you were not just another officer who had never been tested. I needed to know that you understood what it meant to put everything on the line." Over the next few weeks, Jessica began the process of transitioning her responsibilities to the officer who would replace her. Lieutenant Davis was experienced and capable, but Jessica wanted to make sure he understood the culture and values that had made Alpha Company so successful. The key, she explained to Davis during one of their briefing sessions, is not to treat soldiers like machines that just need fuel and maintenance. They are people with hopes, fears, families, and dreams that extend far beyond their military service. When you support them as whole human beings, they will give you their absolute best as soldiers. Davis nodded, taking notes as she spoke. What about discipline? How do you maintain standards while also being supportive? Discipline and support are not opposites, Jessica replied. In fact, they work together. When soldiers know that you genuinely care about their welfare and their success, they are more willing to meet high standards because they understand that those standards are designed to protect them and help them excel. The farewell ceremony was held on a crisp Friday morning in October. The entire unit was assembled in formation, along with several other companies and base leadership. Colonel Martinez gave a speech about Jessica's accomplishments and the impact she had made on the base's overall performance. But the moment that would be remembered long after the official ceremony was when Thompson stepped forward to address the assembled soldiers. I want to say something about Lieutenant Jessica that might surprise some of you, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. When she first arrived here, I thought she was wrong for this unit. I thought she did not understand how things really worked, and I made it my mission to prove that point. He paused, looking directly at Jessica before continuing. I was completely wrong. Not just wrong about her qualifications or her experience, but wrong about what leadership really means. Lieutenant Jessica taught me that true leadership is not about being the toughest or the loudest or the most intimidating person in the room. It is about creating an environment where everyone can be their best. The soldiers in formation listened intently as Thompson continued his speech. She changed this unit, but more importantly, she changed all of us as individuals. She showed us that being a good soldier and being a good person are not separate things. They are the same thing. When Thompson finished speaking, he came to attention and gave Jessica the kind of salute that is reserved for leaders who have earned absolute respect and loyalty. One by one, every soldier in the formation followed his example, creating a moment of recognition that went far beyond military protocol. After the ceremony, as Jessica was packing up her office, soldiers from the unit stopped by to say goodbye and share their thoughts about her leadership. Private Williams, who had struggled with stress and trauma when she first arrived, was now one of the unit's most reliable soldiers and was preparing for promotion to corporal. Ma'am, I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me when I was having problems, he said. Getting help with my stress issues changed my whole life, not just my military career. Corporal Hayes, whose family had benefited from the support programs Jessica had implemented, brought his wife and children to meet her. Lieutenant, my family wanted to thank you personally for connecting us with the resources we needed. You saved my marriage and probably my military career too. Even Private Rodriguez, who had been mentored by Thompson for leadership development, had been selected for sergeant and would be taking over many of Thompson's responsibilities when he eventually transferred to another assignment. As Jessica loaded her belongings into her car for the drive to Washington, Thompson approached her one final time. Ma'am, I have one more thing I need to tell you, he said. I have been recommended for promotion to sergeant major, and I have been asked to help train other non-commissioned officers in leadership techniques. I plan to teach them everything you taught me about leading people instead of just managing soldiers. Jessica smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Thompson, that might be the best news I have heard all day. The Army needs more leaders who understand that strength and compassion are not opposites. I learned that from watching you. He replied, you never tried to be someone you were not, and you never asked us to be anything other than the best versions of ourselves. As she drove away from Fort Harrison for the last time, Jessica reflected on what she had learned during her 2 years with Alpha Company. She had arrived as a young officer trying to prove that she belonged in a male-dominated environment. She was leaving as a confident leader who understood that the best way to earn respect is to give IT first. The story of her confrontation with Thompson had become part of base folklore, but the details had been exaggerated and changed over time. Some versions made it sound like a dramatic fight, others like a test of pure physical strength. Jessica was content to let people tell whatever version they preferred, because the real story was not about one moment of confrontation. The real story was about the months and years of daily work that followed, the gradual building of trust and mutual respect, and the understanding that leadership is not about dominance, but about service. It was about proving that when people are treated with dignity and given the support they need to succeed, they will exceed every expectation. Years later, when Jessica had advanced to colonel and was leading much larger organizations, she would often think back to those early days with Alpha Company, the lessons she learned about leadership, about earning respect, and about the importance of seeing soldiers as complete human beings would guide her throughout her career and somewhere on military bases around the world. Former members of Alpha Company were applying those same lessons with their own units, creating a ripple effect of better leadership that would continue long after everyone had forgotten the specific details of how it all began. The legacy was not in the story that people told about a female officer who demanded respect from her soldiers. The legacy was in the understanding that respect, once earned through genuine care and competent leadership, creates bonds that make any unit stronger, more effective, and more committed to their shared mission of serving something greater than themselves.